My husband threw my suitcase onto the porch at 1:14 p.m. and told me not to make a scene. His mistress was standing behind him in my silk robe, drinking from the anniversary mug I had bought him in Nashville. The porch light kept flickering over her diamond bracelet like it was laughing at me. Then Daniel said, "You built nothing here, Claire. You just got comfortable in a house my ambition paid for." I remember looking past his shoulder into the foyer, at the framed photo of us cutting the ribbon outside our first office in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was 38 years old, a contract compliance consultant, and I knew exactly how much of Daniel Mercer's empire had been paid for by ambition. Not his. Mine. But that night, with my suitcase split open at my feet, and my neighbor's curtains glowing in the dark, I let him believe the lie one more time. Daniel had always been good at performing success. He had the polished shoes, the expensive watch, the calm handshake that made bankers lean forward. I had the spreadsheets, the vendor contracts, the licensing paperwork, the tax notices, and every quiet correction that kept his dream from collapsing in its first year. In public, he was the founder of Mercer Home Systems. In private, he asked me where the payroll login was every other Friday. We had been married for 12 years. Long enough for people to forget who was in the room when the company began. Long enough for Daniel to turn my steadiness into invisibility. He started calling me careful like it was an insult. He said I slowed him down because I read every agreement before signing. He said real entrepreneurs took risks. I told him real adults knew what they were risking. And he stopped asking me to come to investor dinners. The woman in my robe was named Bianca Vale. And she had entered our lives 6 months earlier with a champagne laugh and a father who owned half the storage units in South Carolina. Daniel called her a strategic partner at first. Then a family friend. Then someone who understood the level he was trying to reach. By the time he stopped hiding her texts, he had already begun practicing the voice of a man who thought he was upgrading his life. Bianca was 31. Beautiful in a sharp, expensive way, and careful enough to never insult me directly when anyone important was watching. She called me sweet with the kind of smile women use when they want men to think cruelty is charm. At a company dinner in March, she touched Daniel's sleeve and said, "Some men are just built for bigger things than domestic comfort." Daniel laughed. I smiled. I had learned years ago that silence makes arrogant people generous with evidence. That was the part Daniel never understood about me. I did not argue when the room was full. I watched. I remembered. I saved emails because contracts taught me that truth without records becomes just another feeling people can deny. I kept copies of amendments, ownership filings, loan guarantees, board resolutions, insurance binders, and one notarized operating agreement Daniel had signed without reading on a rainy Tuesday, 8 years earlier. Back then, we were living in a one-bedroom apartment above a tire shop. Daniel had a logo, a dream, and $19,000 in credit card debt. I had a severance check from the hospital procurement office where I used to work, a clean credit score, and a stubborn belief that love meant building with both hands. The first business account was opened under my name because Daniel's debt made the bank manager hesitate. He said we would change it later. We did not change it later. Not because I trapped him. Because Daniel kept needing me to sign things he did not want to understand. The commercial lease, the equipment financing, the vendor indemnity forms, the state licensing paperwork, the insurance policies, the payroll tax registration. Every time I asked if he wanted to sit down and review the structure, he kissed my forehead and said, "Baby, you handle the boring part. I'll handle the growth." The boring part became 7 offices, 86 employees, 3 service divisions, and a regional brand people recognized on vans all over North Carolina. The boring part kept us from being sued twice. The boring part caught an embezzling warehouse manager before he drained $250,000. The boring part negotiated the supplier agreement Daniel bragged about on a podcast as the deal that changed everything. Still, inside our marriage, I became the woman in the background. At charity events, donors asked Daniel how he managed such rapid growth. And he said, Vision. At employee parties, he thanked the sales team, the operations team, the marketing team, and then glanced at me as if I were part of the catering. I used to tell myself it did not matter. The mortgage was paid. The employees had health insurance. We were building something real. Then Daniel began correcting my clothes before public events. He said my navy dresses looked like I was going to a deposition. He said I should soften up around investors. He said Bianca understood presentation. I laughed the first time because I thought it was ridiculous. The second time, I went upstairs and changed because I was too tired to turn dinner into a trial. That is how small humiliations grow. Not all at once. One surrender at a time. My sister Erin noticed before I admitted it. She lived in Raleigh and had 2 kids. A blunt mouth. And no patience for Daniel's charm. One Sunday, while Daniel took a call on the patio, she watched him through the kitchen window and said, "He talks to you like you're an employee he can't fire." I told her marriage was complicated. She said, "No, Claire. Complicated is not the same thing as cruel." I hated how steady her voice sounded. The first time I saw Bianca inside my house, Daniel said she had stopped by to review expansion projections. They were sitting at my dining table with wine open and no laptop in sight. Bianca was wearing cream heels on the rug my mother had bought us before she died. Daniel introduced the moment like I was the unreasonable one for noticing. "Don't start," he said. Before I had even opened my mouth. That was when I understood he had already written my role in his story. For weeks, I tried to be calm in the way women are praised for being calm when their lives are being rearranged without permission. I asked direct questions. He gave offended answers. I asked if he was having an affair. He said I was insecure. I asked why Bianca's consulting invoice had been approved without a scope of work. He said I was jealous of Mormon. That one almost made me laugh. Because successful women usually know how to invoice for more than perfume and hotel lunches. By August, Daniel stopped pretending at home. He slept in the guest room and called it needing space. He stayed out late and called it networking. He transferred $50,000 from the household account to a growth opportunity and called it leadership. When I moved the remaining savings into an account requiring dual authorization, he accused me of financial abuse. That word sat between us like a dirty knife. He had learned it from Bianca. I was sure of it. The night he threw me out. I had come home from a client audit in Atlanta and found my clothes packed into 2 suitcases by the staircase. Not folded. Stuffed. My makeup bag had been dumped into a grocery sack. Foundation leaking over my toothbrush. On the entry table lay a manila envelope labeled "Separation Terms" in Daniel's handwriting. Bianca stood near the living room fireplace. Barefoot. Holding a glass of my wine. Daniel looked calm. That was the worst part. Not angry. Not ashamed. Calm. Like he had rehearsed mercy and decided I deserved none. He said the marriage had been dead for years. That he had outgrown what we were. That Bianca could help him take Mercer Home Systems national. Then he slid the envelope toward me and said, "Sign this. And I'll be generous. Fight me. And I'll make sure you leave with what you came with." I opened the envelope because habit is stronger than heartbreak. Inside was a proposed settlement giving me 6 months of temporary support. My car. My personal clothing. And no claim to Mercer Home Systems or affiliated entities. The document referred to Daniel as sole founder and controlling owner. It referred to me as spouse. Just spouse. I stared at that word for a long time while Bianca pretended not to smile over the rim of her glass. I asked Daniel if his attorney had reviewed the company records before drafting it. He smirked like I had finally said something cute. "Claire, don't embarrass yourself. You handled paperwork. That doesn't make you an owner," Bianca added softly. "Sometimes support roles feel bigger from the inside." I looked at her then. Really looked at her. And saw the confidence of a woman standing in a house she thought had already been transferred to her name. I did not scream. I wanted to. My throat burned so badly I could taste metal. But I had spent years training myself to read the dangerous clause before reacting to the insulting sentence. So I set the papers back on the table, lined up the corners, and asked for my laptop bag. Daniel refused. He said company devices stayed with the company. I told him the laptop was mine, purchased before Mercer existed. He laughed and said, "Prove it." That was the first mistake he made that night. Not the affair. Not the robe. Not the settlement. The laptop. Because inside that old black bag was a portable drive I had carried for 8 years. First out of caution, then out of instinct. It held scanned copies of every document Daniel had mocked as boring. Articles of organization, ownership schedules, bank signature cards, trademark assignments, tax registrations, the original operating agreement, my mother's check stub from the money I invested after her funeral. I did not tell him that. I looked toward the office door and said, "Keep it." Daniel blinked, surprised by how easily I surrendered. Bianca's smile widened. She thought I had broken. Maybe Daniel did too. Maybe they both mistook exhaustion for defeat because they had never seen what I looked like when I stopped pleading and started calculating. He carried my suitcase to the porch himself, as if touching my belongings proved the house was his. The zipper tore halfway down the steps, spilling my clothes over the welcome mat that still said Mercer's live here in blue script. Bianca stood in the doorway behind him, wrapped in my robe, and said, "I hope someday you can be grateful he's giving you a clean ending." I picked up my sweater from the wet porch boards and looked at the word welcome under my shoes. Then Daniel leaned close enough for me to smell the bourbon on his breath. "You're not built for war, Claire," he whispered. "You're built for paperwork." For 1 second, the humiliation almost knocked the air out of me. Then something inside me went very still. Because he was right about one thing. I was built for paperwork. And by morning, paperwork was going to become the most dangerous thing Daniel Mercer had ever underestimated. I slept that night in Erin's guest room under a quilt her youngest had spilled grape juice on 2 years earlier. My hands would not stop shaking. So I folded them under my ribs and stared at the ceiling fan until sunrise. Erin wanted to call Daniel. Then a lawyer. Then the police. Then every woman in Charlotte with a Facebook account. I told her no. Not yet. The first thing I needed was coffee, a shower, and a printer. By 8 in the morning, I was sitting at Erin's kitchen table with my phone plugged into the wall and my old cloud archive open. Daniel had kept the laptop bag. But he had forgotten I was the kind of woman who backed up a backup. The portable drive mattered. But it was not the only place I kept records. In my world, documents did not exist in one place. That was how people lost lawsuits, businesses, and homes. The first file I opened was titled MHS Formation Packet. I had named it that in 2016, back when Daniel still believed paperwork was something adults did together. The articles of organization listed me as the registered agent and managing member of Mercer Home Systems, LLC. The ownership schedule attached to the original operating agreement listed my membership interest at 70% and Daniel's at 30%. He had signed it with a blue pen while complaining that the rain made his shoes squeak. I did not smile when I saw it. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired in a way that seemed older than my body. There are moments when proof does not heal you. It only confirms that the person hurting you knew enough to lie carefully. Daniel had not forgotten I owned the company. He had simply convinced himself that because he was louder, better dressed, and more admired, reality might eventually rearrange itself around his ego. Erin stood behind me in her bathrobe, reading over my shoulder. "Claire," she whispered. "This says you own most of it." I nodded. She looked at me like she was seeing a bruise under good makeup. Did he know? I clicked into the folder labeled Bank Authorizations and opened the signature card from First Carolina Trust. Daniel's signature sat below mine, dated the same week. "He knew enough to sign," I said. "He just never respected what he signed." The house was more complicated, but not in Daniel's favor. We had bought it after Mercer's third profitable year, and the down payment had come from a distribution made to me as majority member. The deed listed both our names because I had still believed marriage was not supposed to be a battlefield. But the home office, the warehouse lease, the vehicle fleet, the trademarks, and the supplier agreements were tied to entities where my ownership was not emotional. It was recorded. At Noah Shoptis Brzeche. M. Daniel sent his first text. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. By 9:25. He sent another. Bianca thinks you should pick up the rest of your personal things Thursday when we're not home. That one made Erin curse so loudly her dog ran into the laundry room. I stared at the message and imagined Bianca walking through my closet, touching my mother's jewelry box, deciding what counted as personal and what counted as abandoned. I replied, with one sentence. Please preserve all company records, devices, accounts, and physical files until legal counsel has reviewed ownership and separation matters. Daniel called within 30 seconds. I let it ring. Then he called again. Then Bianca texted from a number I did not have saved. Claire. This hostile tone is unnecessary. Daniel wants peace. I looked at those words for a long time. Peace, apparently, meant I was supposed to disappear politely from my own life. By noon, Daniel had locked me out of the shared personal email, the company scheduling platform, and the home security app. That might have frightened me 10 years earlier. It did not frighten me now. It annoyed me. Access logs existed. Administrative changes left timestamps. I had helped negotiate the vendor contract for that platform myself. And I knew exactly who to call for a records preservation letter. Daniel thought Power was taking keys. I knew Power was proving who took them. The worst part came that afternoon, when he sent a company-wide email. Erin was the one who saw it first, because a dispatcher named Mara forwarded it to my personal account with the subject line. Are you okay? Daniel's email said I had decided to step back from Mercer Home Systems to focus on personal wellness during a difficult marital transition. It thanked me for my past administrative contributions. It announced that Bianca Vale would assist the executive office during the National Expansion Initiative. Past administrative contributions. I read those 3 words until they stopped looking like English. Mara's forwarded note underneath was only 2 lines. Claire. I know this isn't true. You trained half of us. Tell me what you need. That was when I cried. Not when Daniel threw the suitcase. Not when Bianca wore my robe. I cried because someone in the company remembered my hands on the foundation before Daniel painted his name across the walls. For the next week, Daniel moved quickly because arrogance always mistakes speed for strategy. He had Bianca photographed beside him at the Charlotte office, smiling under the Mercer Home Systems sign. He told employees I was unstable but that he wished me healing. He called vendors and said all approvals should go through him only. He invited a business magazine to cover the expansion announcement. In every picture, he wore the face of a man already enjoying the life he stole. I moved slower. I called a family law attorney first. Then a business litigation attorney she recommended. His name was Malcolm Price. And he had the exhausted patience of a man who had spent 20 years watching people confuse signatures with suggestions. During our first meeting, I laid out the operating agreement. Bank documents, tax filings, trademark assignments, vendor contracts, and Daniel's proposed settlement. Malcolm turned pages without drama. When he finished, he removed his glasses and said, Your husband is either very bold or very poorly advised. I almost laughed. He thinks those are the same thing. Malcolm looked at the settlement again. He is asking you to disclaim ownership in entities where you appear to be the majority owner. He also locked you out of business systems after being notified to preserve records. That is not a good look. He said it mildly. But I heard the steel underneath. For the first time since the porch. My breathing came easier. Still, legal leverage did not erase emotional damage. Every night, I woke up reaching for the left side of a bed I no longer slept in. Every morning, I remembered Bianca in my robe before I remembered where I was. Aaron tried to feed me toast and fury in equal amounts. I appreciated the toast more. Fury was useful. But only in small doses. Too much of it made your hands sloppy. I needed clean hands. Daniel's mother, Patricia, called on the 6th day. She had always loved family reputation more than family, which meant she appeared whenever appearances needed managing. Claire, she said, in the voice she used for church committees. I know you're hurt. But you must not punish Daniel for finding happiness. I sat in Aaron's driveway with the phone against my ear and watched 2 kids ride bikes past a row of mailboxes. He threw me out, I said. At night. Patricia sighed like I had mentioned a stain on linen. He told me you became controlling. Men under pressure make mistakes. But good wives don't burn down what they helped build. There it was. The family version of fairness. I was allowed to help build. Allowed to sacrifice. Allowed to be humiliated for the sake of peace. But if I protected myself, I became the destructive one. I said, I'm not burning anything down. Patricia. I'm checking the ownership records. The silence that followed was small and sharp. Then she said, that sounds vindictive. I looked at my bare ring finger. Still pale where the band had been. No. I said. It sounds accurate. She hung up without saying goodbye. 10 minutes later. Daniel texted me. Stop threatening my mother. That was Daniel's gift. He could turn a sentence into a weapon. Then act wounded when you noticed the blade. By the 2nd week, Bianca's wealthy image began to crack in ways Daniel did not yet understand. Malcolm's investigator found public records showing Vale Capital, her father's company, had 3 active creditor claims and a pending tax lien. The strategic partner was not bringing expansion money. She was bringing a last name Daniel had not bothered to inspect. I stared at the report in Malcolm's office, thinking of her diamond bracelet, her cream heels, her soft voice telling me support roles felt bigger from the inside. Malcolm asked if I wanted to move immediately for emergency business relief. I could have. Part of me wanted to walk into Daniel's office that day with a court filing and watch his face empty out. But I knew Daniel. If pushed too soon, he would become dangerous in quieter ways. He would delete, deny, spin, and scatter blame across every person near him. I needed him confident. Confident people leave doors open because they believe no one is coming through them. So we sent a formal records preservation notice. We requested access. We notified the registered agent address. We copied the company's outside accountant, the payroll provider, and the bank. We did not accuse him of theft. We did not mention Bianca's lions. We did not threaten public exposure. We simply used dates, entity names, document titles, and the calmest language in the world. It looked boring. That was why it worked. 3 days later, the accountant called me directly. His name was Peter Lang, and he had worked with us since the apartment above the tire shop. He sounded nervous. Claire. Daniel asked me to prepare revised ownership schedules for lender review. He said. He said it was just cleanup. I closed my eyes. There are betrayals that hurt. And then there are betrayals so predictable they make you cold. Peter, I said. Did he ask you to backdate anything? Peter did not answer right away. In that pause, an entire marriage told on itself. Finally, he said. He implied the original records were informal. I opened the notebook beside me and wrote the time of the call. Please don't alter anything, I said. You should speak with your counsel before responding to him. Peter exhaled. I figured you'd say that. Then. Softer. For what it's worth. I remember who signed the first checks. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it saved me, but because it reminded me I had not imagined my own life. Daniel had spent years sanding me down into a side note. But records remained. People remembered. Dates remained. The first checks remained. The ribbon-cutting photo remained. My mother's money remained. The truth had not vanished just because a man in a tailored suit stopped saying it out loud. The public humiliation reached its peak at the expansion event Daniel hosted at a hotel ballroom downtown. I did not attend. But clips appeared online within hours. Bianca stood beside him in a red dress while Daniel told a room of contractors and investors that Mercer Home Systems was entering a bold new era, free from small thinking. The audience laughed in the polite way business audiences laugh when they smell money. Then he lifted a champagne glass and said, "To loyalty, vision, and knowing when to leave the past behind." Mara sent me the clip with no message. Aaron watched it over my shoulder and whispered, "Please tell me we get to ruin him." I turned off the video before the toast ended. My chest hurt. But my mind was clear. "No," I said. "We're not going to ruin him." Aaron looked at me like I had lost my spine. I opened the folder Malcolm had prepared for the emergency injunction and placed Daniel's settlement demand on top. "We're going to let the truth do it properly." That night, I drove back to Charlotte alone for the first time since Daniel threw me out. I parked across the street from the house and watched warm light fill the windows I had chosen. Cleaned, paid for, and once loved. Bianca's car sat in the driveway. Daniel's shadow moved behind the curtains. On the porch, the welcome mat was gone. For some reason, that hurt more than the robe. He had removed the word welcome, as if the house had been telling the truth by accident. I did not get out. I sat there with both hands on the steering wheel and let the grief pass through me without giving it instructions. Then I took one photograph of the house. Not for court. Not for revenge. But for myself. A record of the last night I looked at that porch like it still had the power to decide whether I belonged. After that, I drove to Malcolm's office and signed the papers authorizing him to file. The next morning, Daniel received notice that I was seeking emergency relief to restore my access to company systems, prevent alteration of ownership records, and stop any transfer of assets outside ordinary business operations. He called me 17 times before lunch. I answered none of them. Then he left a voicemail. His voice low and furious. "You have no idea what you just started. Claire." I saved it in 3 places. At Doi Patru Pu. M. Bianca texted me one final time. "You're embarrassing yourself. Daniel built that company. Everyone knows it." I looked at the message. Then, at the original operating agreement spread open on Malcolm's conference table. Daniel's blue signature bright as a bruise. For the first time in 2 weeks. I smiled. Not because I was happy. Because Bianca had just confirmed the mistake both of them were making. They thought the world would believe whoever spoke loudest. They had forgotten I was built for paperwork. Daniel did not sound like a man who believed I had no power when he left the second voicemail. He sounded like a man standing in a room where the lights had suddenly come on. "Claire, call me before you make this worse," he said. "You're angry. I get that. But dragging the company into our personal issues is reckless." I listened once, saved it, and wrote down the time. Reckless was his word for a woman refusing to vanish on schedule. By Friday, his tone changed from threats to performance. He sent an email with the subject line, "Let's be adults," copying Patricia and a mediator he had apparently found online that morning. In it, he said he wanted a respectful resolution that protected the employees from my emotional instability. He wrote that I had been valuable in administrative support but had never carried the burden of leadership. Then he offered to increase my temporary support to 12 months if I signed away all business claims within 48 hours. I read the email in Malcolm's office while rain tapped against the windows. Act, Malcolm's assistant, Donna, handed me a yellow pad without being asked. I circled 3 phrases: emotional instability, administrative support. 48 hours. Daniel had always revealed himself in language. When he was scared, he wrapped panic in authority. When he was cornered, he called it leadership. When he wanted something stolen to look clean, he called it a deadline. Malcolm leaned back in his chair. He wants you rushed. I nodded. Because the lender meeting is Monday. Daniel had been courting Southeastern Commercial Bank for months, hoping to finance 5 new offices and a distribution warehouse outside Columbia. The bank wanted updated ownership schedules, a clean litigation disclosure, and confirmation that no managing member disputes existed. Daniel had planned to present Bianca as incoming capital and me as an inconvenient ex-wife. Now the timing was turning against him. That weekend, Patricia invited me to Sunday lunch at her house. She said it would be just family. Which meant Daniel, Bianca, Daniel's brother, his aunt, and anyone else she believed could make me feel outnumbered. Aaron told me not to go. Malcolm told me I was not required to go. My body told me to hide under a blanket and let professionals handle everything. But something quieter in me knew Daniel's family needed to see my face before they heard his version become permanent. Patricia lived in a brick house with white columns and a dining room full of furniture nobody was allowed to use casually. When I arrived, Daniel's truck was already there. Bianca's white Mercedes sat in the driveway like a dare. I parked on the street. Before I got out, I checked my phone, started a voice memo, and slid it into my coat pocket. North Carolina's recording laws allowed one-party consent. I knew because boring paperwork had taught me useful things. The dining table was set for 8. Though no food had been served. That was the first sign it was not lunch. Patricia sat at one end with her pearls on. Daniel stood near the fireplace, jaw tight. Bianca sat beside him, dressed in pale blue, looking wounded in advance. Daniel's brother avoided my eyes. Aunt Linda gave me a sympathy smile that did not reach her hands. I remained standing near the doorway, close enough to leave without asking permission. Patricia began softly. Claire, we love you. That's why we're concerned. I looked at Daniel, then at Bianca, and back at Patricia. Concerned about what Daniel stepped forward. About you trying to destroy everything because our marriage ended. His voice had that careful public calm I used to mistake for maturity. I built a company people depend on. Families depend on it. You're putting all of them at risk because you can't accept that I moved on. Bianca lowered her eyes at moved on. As if adultery became elegance when spoken gently. Patricia folded her hands. No one is denying you helped, dear. But help is not ownership. You must be fair. That word again. Fair. In that room, fairness meant Daniel kept the company. Bianca kept my house. Patricia kept her reputation. And I kept my mouth shut. I looked at the table settings. The polished forks. The water glasses waiting for a meal no one intended to eat. I said, if this is about fairness, we can start with the operating agreement. Daniel's expression flickered. Only for half a second. But I saw it. Patricia did too. Bianca did not. She leaned forward and said, documents can be misunderstood. Claire, Daniel told me a lot of things were put under your name temporarily because you had better credit. That doesn't mean you get to punish him for trusting you. I almost admired how quickly she turned his dependence into my betrayal. Daniel seized the opening. Exactly. You know what happened back then. We were married. We made decisions for convenience. I nodded slowly. And for 8 years afterward he looked away. You never asked to change anything, I said. You never paid me out. You never filed amendments. You never corrected tax records. You never told the bank the ownership schedule was wrong. But now that you want me gone, everything is suddenly informal. Aunt Linda whispered Daniel's name like she wanted him to stop before the floor broke. He did not stop. Men like Daniel rarely stop at the edge because they believe edges move. You're twisting this, he said. You sat at home with spreadsheets while I took all the risk. That sentence landed so hard the room went still. I thought of my mother's severance check, my credit, my signature on loans, my nights reconciling payroll while Daniel practiced speeches in the mirror. For one breath, I wanted to hurt him with every detail. Instead, I spoke evenly. I carried risk you were too proud to understand. Bianca laughed once. Small and sharp. Then why didn't anyone know I turned to her? Because I was married. Not auditioning. Her face flushed. Daniel moved closer to the table. This is what I mean, he said to his family. She's vindictive. She's always needed control. Now she's trying to humiliate Bianca because Bianca represents growth. That was when Bianca made her mistake. She opened her purse and pulled out a folder. Daniel has options, she said. My family is prepared to support the expansion once this drama is resolved. I watched her slide a letter across the table to Patricia, who looked relieved before she read it. Daniel's chin lifted. For a moment, the old room rearranged around money. Bianca's money. The magic word Daniel had used to justify replacing a wife with an investor. I recognized the letterhead immediately because Malcolm's investigator had shown it to me. Vale Capital Strategic Holdings. Same company. Same address. Same pending creditor claims. Bianca had brought a promise from a wounded company and placed it on Patricia's polished table like proof of superiority. I did not mention the liens. Not there. Not yet. Some facts were more powerful when released in front of the people who had relied on the lie. Patricia looked at me with renewed firmness. Claire. There is still a graceful path here. Sign the agreement. Take the support. Let Daniel move forward. You can begin again without bitterness. I looked at Daniel's mother and finally understood something that had taken me 12 years to learn. She did not care whether I was telling the truth. She cared whether the truth was inconvenient to the family's preferred story. That was a different kind of betrayal. Quieter but older, I said. I will not sign away ownership I legally hold. I will not waive claims under pressure. And I will not discuss settlement in a room with my husband's mistress. Bianca stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. You don't get to call me that. Daniel reached for her wrist. But I kept my eyes on him. Then what should I call a woman wearing my robe in my house while my husband throws me onto the porch? Nobody spoke. The silence had weight. Daniel's brother looked down at his plate. Aunt Linda covered her mouth. Patricia's face hardened because shame had entered the room. And she preferred shame only when she could aim it at someone else. Daniel whispered. You need to leave. It was almost funny. Hearing him say it again in another doorway. I nodded. I was already leaving. Then I walked out before my hands started shaking. In my car. I stopped the recording and sent it to Malcolm. I did not feel triumphant. I felt scraped, raw. People imagine standing up for yourself as a clean, cinematic moment. It is not. Sometimes it feels like pulling glass out of your own skin while everyone asks why you are making such a mess. By the time I reached Aaron's house, my mascara had dried in rough lines under my eyes. And my sister met me on the porch without saying a word. Monday morning. The lender meeting collapsed before it began. Southeastern Commercial Bank received Malcolm's notice of disputed control and requested clarification from all managing members before proceeding. Daniel called the bank president personally and tried to explain that I was an estranged spouse, acting emotionally. The bank asked for the current operating agreement. Daniel sent a partial packet. Malcolm sent the complete packet, including the signature pages, tax filings, and prior lender certifications, where Daniel had identified me as majority member. By noon, Peter, the accountant, forwarded me an email Daniel had sent him at 6:13 a.m. It said, "We need to clean up the historical ownership records today. Claire is weaponizing old paperwork that was never meant to reflect actual control." Peter's reply was short, "I cannot alter historical records. Please direct legal matters through counsel." I printed both emails and placed them in a folder labeled Attempted Record Revision. The name was plain. The contents were not. That afternoon, Mercer Home Systems' outside payroll provider restored my administrative access after receiving documentation of my ownership and Malcolm's letter. I did not touch payroll. I did not lock Daniel out. I did not send a dramatic company-wide email. I logged in. Downloaded audit trails, access changes, and user activity from the night Daniel removed me. The timestamps were clean. Daniel's administrator account had disabled mine at 1216 a.m. Less than 40 minutes after he threw me out. The home security company was less cooperative until Malcolm sent a subpoena notice. Then they preserved 30 days of access logs and front porch clips tied to my account. I did not want to watch the footage. But evidence does not care what you want. In Malcolm's conference room, I watched Daniel drag my suitcase across the threshold. I watched Bianca stand behind him in my robe. I watched my clothes spill onto the mat. The camera had no music. No mercy. No interpretation. Just truth. I asked Malcolm to pause the video when Daniel leaned toward me. There was no audio from the porch camera. But the angle showed his mouth near my ear. My body going rigid. His finger pointed at the street. The welcome mat was visible beneath the broken suitcase. Mercers live here. I stared at those blue letters until they blurred. That mat had become the symbol of every lie I had tolerated. A word placed outside a door that had never fully welcomed me when power mattered. Malcolm said gently. We don't have to use this unless necessary. I shook my head. We use what is necessary. Not more. That became my rule. I was not going to become Daniel in reverse. I was not going to burn every wall just to prove I had matches. The leverage was specific ownership documents. Attempted record changes. Access logs. Bianca's misleading investment claims. And the porch footage, if he denied the circumstances of my removal. The hearing for temporary business control was scheduled for Thursday morning. Daniel's attorney requested a private conference first, which meant Daniel had finally hired someone who could read. We agreed to meet at Malcolm's office Wednesday at 4. Daniel insisted on attending in person. Bianca insisted too, though she had no legal role in the company or the marriage. Malcolm advised against letting her in the room. I said let her sit there. Some people needed to be present when their fantasy received paperwork. Before the meeting, I went back to the house with Aaron and a neutral property retrieval service. Daniel was not home. But Bianca was. She stood in the doorway wearing leggings and my old cashmere cardigan. Pretending surprise. The retrieval worker handed her the court-approved list of personal items. Bianca scanned it and said, "This is excessive." I looked over her shoulder at the foyer, where our ribbon-cutting photo had been removed from the wall. The blank rectangle of paint was still there. I retrieved my mother's jewelry box, my winter coats, my personal files from the upstairs closet, and the mug Bianca had used that first night. I do not know why I took the mug. It was chipped near the handle, and not worth anything. Maybe because small things become witnesses when large things are stolen. Bianca watched me wrap it in newspaper. "You're really going to take a mug?" she said. I looked at her cardigan. I'm learning to recognize what belongs to me. At 4 the next day, Daniel arrived at Malcolm's office in a navy suit and a face arranged for negotiation. Bianca came behind him, carrying a designer notebook she never opened. Daniel's attorney, a tired man named Russell Grant, shook Malcolm's hand and avoided looking at the folder in front of me. Everyone sat around the conference table. Rain pressed against the glass again. Soft and steady. Like the weather had decided to attend every important moment. Daniel began before his attorney could stop him. "Claire, this has gone far enough." His voice was lower than usual, almost intimate. The voice he used when he wanted to sound like the reasonable one in a private tragedy. "I'm willing to be generous. You can keep the Raleigh condo investment, even though we both know I paid for most of it. You can have support for 18 months, but you need to stop interfering with the company." I folded my hands on the table. "Which company?" He stared at me. "Don't play games." Malcolm opened the first folder and slid copies across to Russell. Articles. Operating agreement. Ownership schedule. Bank certifications. Tax K-1S. Trademark assignments. Peter's email. Access logs. Each page landed quietly. But the room changed with every one. Bianca looked from Daniel to the documents, waiting for the confident explanation he had apparently promised her. Russell read for several minutes, his expression growing flatter. Then he turned to Daniel and said, very carefully, I need a moment with my client. Daniel flushed. No. Say it here. Russell closed the folder. Daniel. One word. A warning. But Daniel had built his life on ignoring warnings delivered by people who understood documents better than he did. He pointed at the papers and said, this is old administrative junk. She knows what the real arrangement was. I opened my own folder then. Not the legal one. The smaller one with a single printed email on top. Daniel's message to Peter. We need to clean up the historical ownership records today. Claire is weaponizing old paperwork. I slid it across the table. Is this part of the real arrangement? Daniel's mouth opened. Then closed. Bianca leaned toward him. What is that? For the first time. Her voice sounded less polished. Less wealthy. Less sure. Malcolm did not raise his voice. We also have system access logs. Lender correspondence. And preservation notices. If Mr. Mercer continues representing himself as sole owner or attempts to modify historical records, we will seek broader relief. Russell rubbed his forehead. Understood. Daniel stared at me like I had betrayed him by keeping the truth in order. You planned this, he said. No, I answered. I maintained records. You planned this. Badly. That should have been the turning point. In a cleaner story, Daniel would have gone quiet. Bianca would have left. And the legal process would have handled the rest. But people do not surrender just because the facts are against them. They surrender when they run out of audience. Daniel still believed he had one more stage. The annual employee appreciation dinner was scheduled for Friday night. And he had already sent invitations to staff, vendors, lenders, and local press. Russell advised him to postpone it. Patricia begged him to make peace privately. Bianca, I later learned, told him that canceling would look weak. Daniel chose the stage. He sent a company-wide update Thursday evening saying rumors were circulating due to personal disputes but that strong leadership would address them at the dinner. Mara forwarded it to me with 3 words, "Are you coming?" I looked at the invitation on my desk. Then, at the porch footage preserved on Malcolm's drive, I typed back, "Yes." The employee appreciation dinner was held in the ballroom of the same hotel where Daniel had toasted to leaving the past behind. He had chosen gold tablecloths, white flowers, and a stage with the Mercer Home Systems logo glowing behind the podium. It looked expensive in the way desperate things often do. By the time I arrived, employees were clustered near the bar. Vendors were pretending not to gossip. And Bianca was posing near the step and repeat, like a woman waiting for her magazine cover. I wore the navy dress Daniel used to say made me look like I was going to a deposition. It fit better than I remembered. Malcolm walked beside me with a leather folder under one arm. And Erin followed behind us because she said she wanted to see Daniel's face when gravity introduced itself. I told her not to enjoy it too much. She said, "I'll try to be professional." Then she smiled in a way that suggested professionalism would be difficult. Mara saw me first. She was standing with 2 dispatchers and a warehouse supervisor near the back wall. Her eyes widened, then softened. She did not rush over or make a scene. She simply nodded once. A quiet signal that I had been seen. That mattered more than applause ever could. For years, I had moved through that company like a support beam inside a wall. Necessary. Unpraised. Invisible, unless someone tried to remove me. Daniel was near the stage with Bianca and Patricia. He turned when the room shifted around my entrance. For half a second, his face showed the truth before he covered it. Fear. Then came anger. Then came the public smile. Stretched thin over panic. He excused himself from a vendor, crossed the ballroom, and stopped close enough that only I could hear him. "This is a private company event," he said. "No," I answered. "It is a company event." Bianca stepped beside him, her hand tucked into his arm. She wore emerald satin and the diamond bracelet I had seen under the porch light. "Claire, this is embarrassing." she whispered. Still committed to the fantasy that shame belonged to me. I looked at her hand on Daniel's sleeve. Then at Patricia pretending not to watch from behind a champagne glass. I agree, I said. But not for the reason you think. Daniel's attorney, Russell, appeared near the registration table, looking like a man who had been dragged to a fire after warning everyone about matches. He saw Malcolm and immediately walked over. They spoke quietly for less than a minute. Russell's face tightened. Daniel noticed and snapped. What now? Malcolm opened his folder just enough to show the stamped order inside. Temporary relief had been granted at 3:38 p.m. Daniel was restrained from altering ownership records, transferring assets, or representing himself as sole controlling owner. The order did not remove him from the company yet. It did something more useful. It stopped the lie from moving forward. Daniel stared at the stamp. Then at Russell. Waiting for rescue. Russell lowered his voice. You should cancel the remarks. Daniel's jaw flexed. Bianca whispered something I could not hear. Patricia's eyes darted toward the guest. Reputation was now trapped in the same room as evidence. And she could not decide which one to feed first. Daniel did not cancel. Of course he did not. 5 minutes later, he walked onto the stage and tapped the microphone. The room quieted with the obedient rhythm of employees who still needed paychecks. He thanked everyone for coming. He thanked vendors for believing in vision. He thanked his mother for teaching him resilience. Then he looked directly at me and said, Mercer Home Systems has faced distractions recently. But strong companies are not built by paperwork. They are built by leadership. A few people clapped. Not me. Daniel continued anyway. He announced that Bianca Vale would be joining the executive team as Expansion Strategy Director, helping guide the company into a bold national future. Bianca rose halfway from her seat, smiling as if the job already existed. I watched Mara look down at her lap. I watched Peter the accountant stand frozen near the side wall. I watched Russell close his eyes. I stood before the applause could decide what it wanted to be. I did not walk quickly. I did not raise my voice. I moved to the center aisle, where everyone could see me without turning the night into theater. Daniel gripped the podium. Claire, he said through the microphone. Not now. I looked at the stage. Then at the employees who had built service schedules through hurricanes, handled angry customers, and kept vans running when Daniel was giving interviews. Actually, I said, now is the first honest time this company has had in weeks. The room went still. Malcolm handed a copy of the order to Russell, who took it like a man accepting weather. I continued without touching the microphone. No executive appointment has been approved. No ownership transfer has occurred. No expansion financing has closed. And Daniel Mercer is under court order not to represent himself as sole controlling owner of Mercer Home Systems. Bianca's smile disappeared first. Daniel's followed. He leaned into the microphone and laughed once. Ugly and forced. This is exactly the kind of instability I've been protecting the company from. I nodded. Then let's use stable things. Malcolm handed me the first page. Articles of organization. Operating agreement. Ownership schedule. Bank certifications. Tax records. All identifying me as majority member or controlling signatory across the core entities Daniel is trying to pledge. Transfer. Or restructure tonight. People began whispering. Daniel pointed at me. Old paperwork. His voice cracked on old. That was when Peter stepped forward. I had not asked him to speak. I would not have put him in that position. But he walked from the wall with both hands clasped in front of him and said, clearly enough for the first 3 tables to hear. Those records were used for taxes, banking, insurance, and lender certifications for years. They were not informal. Daniel turned on him. Peter, stay out of this. Peter flinched, then straightened. You asked me Monday to clean up historical ownership records. I refused. The ballroom changed shape around that sentence. It was no longer a divorce scene. It was a business integrity problem with witnesses, lenders, vendors, employees, and local press standing under rented chandeliers. Daniel had wanted a stage. He had forgotten stages do not only amplify the hero. Bianca stood then, pale under her makeup. Daniel told me Claire was just an administrative spouse. Her voice was sharp with betrayal. But not the kind that made me pity her. She had worn my robe. She had smiled at my suitcase. She had helped him sell the lie because the lie benefited her. Still, in that moment, I saw the panic of a woman, realizing the man she trusted to steal cleanly had not even read the deed to the thing he promised her. I looked at Bianca. You were never joining the executive team tonight. Daniel did not have authority to appoint you unilaterally. And your family company's creditor claims create conflicts that were never disclosed to the lender. The bank representative near the front table pushed his chair back slightly. It was a small sound. It landed like a door locking. Bianca looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Russell. Russell looked at the floor. Daniel tried one last time to make the room smaller. Claire is bitter because our marriage ended. I reached into the folder and removed the printed still from the porch footage. Not the whole video. Just one frame. Daniel at the door. Bianca behind him in my robe. My suitcase open on the mat below. Mercer's live here visible beneath the spilled clothes. I held it up for only a moment. Long enough. Our marriage ended when you threw me out of my home and tried to make me sign away my company before I could read the records. Patricia made a soft sound. Almost like a gasp. But I did not look at her. Daniel's face had gone gray. The photograph did what words could not. It removed elegance. It removed strategy. It removed his wounded husband costume and showed the room a man using humiliation as negotiation. I set the image back in the folder. I will not discuss my marriage further in front of employees. They deserve better than that. But I will protect this company from fraudulent restructuring. Malcolm stepped forward and delivered the practical consequences in his calm, legal voice. Effective immediately. All major financial transactions required dual approval under the temporary order. The lender had paused expansion review, pending verified ownership and governance documents. Bianca had no approved role. An independent review of access changes, attempted record revisions, and proposed asset transfers would begin Monday. Daniel would remain operationally limited until the court and company records were reconciled. No one cheered. Real reversals rarely sound like applause at first. They sound like people breathing after holding still too long. Daniel stepped back from the podium as if the logo behind him had become hot. Bianca picked up her purse with trembling hands and walked toward the exit. But not before Patricia caught her wrist. I could not hear what Patricia said. Bianca pulled away anyway. The diamond bracelet flashed once under the ballroom lights, then disappeared through the doors. Daniel did not chase her. That told me everything about the love story he had tried to sell. He stood on stage, surrounded by flowers he had ordered for his own triumph, watching his future detach itself from him in public. For a moment, I felt the old reflex to soften the room for him, to step in, to explain, to manage the consequences of his choices so no one would think poorly of him. Then, the reflex passed. After the dinner dissolved, employees approached me in quiet waves. Not dramatic. Towns, not sentimental. A dispatcher squeezed my hand and said, "We knew something was wrong." A technician told me Daniel had ordered staff to remove my name from internal templates the morning after I left. Mara hugged me once. Hard. Then stepped back before either of us cried. I told them payroll was safe. Jobs were safe. And nobody would be punished for telling the truth. That was the leadership Daniel never understood. The legal aftermath took months. Not minutes. Daniel fought until fighting became too expensive. Bianca vanished from the company before her business card was printed. Vale Capital's promised investment turned out to be vapor wrapped in perfume. Patricia called twice. Not to apologize, but to ask whether I could keep things discreet for the family's sake. I told her discretion had protected Daniel long enough. Then I blocked her number and slept through the night for the first time in weeks. The divorce settlement was not romantic justice. It was paperwork. Appraisals, negotiations, signatures, and exhaustion. Daniel received a buyout for his minority interest after offsets for unauthorized transfers and damages from attempted governance changes. He lost executive control. I kept Mercer Home Systems. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because the employees deserved an owner who knew where the load-bearing walls were. Sometimes keeping what is yours looks less like revenge and more like responsibility. I sold the house the following spring. I did not want to live inside rooms where I had practiced being small. On the final day, I walked through alone. The foyer wall still held the pale rectangle where Daniel had removed our ribbon-cutting photo. I stood there with my keys in my palm, listening to the empty house settle. Then I placed the chipped anniversary mug on the counter. Not as a gift. Not as a memory. But as proof that I could leave something behind without losing myself. Before I locked the door, I put a new mat on the porch for the buyers. It did not say Mercers live here. It said, "Welcome home," in plain black letters. I stood there for a moment, looking at that word. Welcome. It had taken me 12 years to understand that belonging is not something a husband grants you from a doorway. It is something you build so deeply inside yourself that no one can throw it onto a porch. Mercer Home Systems survived. More than survived. We slowed the expansion, cleaned the books, rebuilt trust with vendors, and promoted people who had been doing invisible work for years. Mara became regional operations manager. Peter stayed through the audit and then retired with a cake so ugly it made everyone laugh. I stopped attending events as Daniel's quiet wife and started walking into rooms as myself. The difference was not loud. It was permanent. People sometimes ask if I regret not exposing him sooner. I do not know how to answer that neatly. I regret the years I mistook endurance for love. I regret every time I changed clothes because he said my confidence made him uncomfortable. I regret letting his ambition use my competence like a ladder and then pretend the ladder had never existed. But I do not regret the silence that taught me how to listen. How to document. How to wait until truth had legs strong enough to stand. Forgiveness, to me, is not handing someone the weapon again because they say their hand slipped. Family is not a word people get to use while pushing you out of the house you helped build. Love without respect is just ownership wearing perfume. And peace is not the absence of conflict. Sometimes peace begins the moment you stop negotiating with people who only understand your pain as a discount. Daniel once told me I was not built for war. He was right. I was built for records, passions, memory, and doors that lock from the inside. I did not destroy his empire. I simply opened the files and showed everyone whose name had been holding it up. He thought he was throwing his wife out to make room for a richer woman. He had no idea he was throwing away the only reason his kingdom had a foundation.